Do you want to give our instructions, please?
Sure. Welcome to our virtual meeting. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link in your original email. Members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. All panelists, that is Alder's commission members and staff, have the ability to mute and unmute themselves. Commission members, please continue to use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the body, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Joe. And you mentioned that we don't have any registrants. Would you just let us know if somebody happens to register?
Will do.
In case that happens. Patrick, if you call a roll, please.
Okay, Grant Foster.
Here.
Okay, and is it Nasra Haley?
Here.
Okay, Chris McCahill.
Here.
Ann Kovich.
Here.
Denise Jess.
Here.
Okay, Bill Bremer.
Here.
Ken Strite.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
And Harold Cleams.
Here.
That's everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I'm very pleased to say that we have another new member appointed to the Transportation Commission. Nasra Wahalieh, who is District 7 Alder, was appointed to serve on the Transportation Commission at the Common Council meeting on the 5th of January. And I'll ask Nasra to introduce herself.
Thanks, Anne. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nasra Wahalieh. I'm originally from Somalia and been Madison resident for the last 30 years. I have 4 kids that I've raised, 3 are adults, and 1 who is 16 years old. I went to UW-Madison and worked with different organizations. And currently, I just started my own business called Empathy for Equity, which is in the diversity, equity, and inclusion side. I have been a resident of District 7 for the last 22 years. This area has been a farmland when we bought our house, and now it's family units and small businesses. So I am very, been blessed to be part of Madison. The community has been really generous to us, and this is like a home to us. So I look forward to serving in the Transportation Commission. And if you have any questions, please do contact me, and I will be more than happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
No, thanks very much. We look forward to having you on the commission.
Thank you.
Did everyone have an opportunity to look at the minutes from the meeting for the 9th of December? If so, does somebody want to make a motion? Harold?
I would move approval of the minutes as submitted.
Is there a second? Ken? Okay. There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? I see no hands. We'll assume unanimous consent approval unless anybody objects. If you object to a unanimous consent vote, please raise your hand. I see no hands. So a motion is carried. And just to double check, everybody has the hand raise feature that they can find in the new Zoom? Okay, awesome. Okay, no public comment, as I understand. Patrick and Joe, you haven't seen anything new come in? No?
No.
Okay. Any disclosures and recusals this evening or recusals this evening? If so, please raise your hand. Okay, no hands. So we'll move on to the consent agenda. So we've proposed items 2 through 9 for inclusion on the consent agenda. We don't have any members from the public registered at all, so there can't be any registered for these items. Are there any of the proposed items on the consent agenda that you would like to separate out? And I see your hand raised. This is interesting. Oh, it's different a little bit in my view too, Joe. Go ahead, Grant.
Item 3, I'd like to separate, please.
Okay.
Which one?
Item
3?
3.
Okay.
Okay, so we have 2 and 4 through 9 proposed for the consent agenda, unless anybody has anything else that they would like to have separated. I don't see any hands. And I'm just taking my time here tonight because it looks a little different for me as in this view of Zoom than it did the last time I did this. So I just want to make sure I don't miss anybody. And the hands are bigger, so that's good. So I have a better shot at seeing your hand on your screen as you raise it. Okay, so at this point, we have item 2, which is Legistar 63381. Item 4, Legistar 63460. 5, Legistar 63462. 6, Legistar 63467. 7, Legistar 63468. 8, Legistar 63469. And 9, excuse me, Legistar 63643. Do we have a motion on the consent agenda? Anyone? Chris, motion?
Yep, move to approve the items on the consent agenda.
Is there a second? Harold? Okay, thank you. Any further discussion about the consent agenda? If so, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands, we'll assume unanimous consent vote for items 2 and 4 through 9 on the consent agenda. Unless there's any objection. If there's any objection, please raise your hand. Okay, the motion carried. Okay, so we'll move on to item number 3. Chris Pankowski, do you want to handle that, please? I assume that's Chris.
Yeah. So this is a item that was brought upon by the approval of the replat for the Village of Autumn Lake. The developer wished to change a little bit of their lot configuration, which changes some of the right-of-ways that were previously platted with the Village of Autumn Lake. So the way this works is once these right-of-ways get discontinued, they become replatted when the Village of Autumn Lake replat would get recorded. So it's kind of basically it's a quick step to vacate the roadways before they get replatted with the new replat. If that makes sense.
Okay, Grant, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm 100% clear, Chris. So, I mean, is the replatting looking to eliminate all of these right-of-ways, and there would not be any? So they're basically just removing them and then replacing them with like housing parcels, or are they being?
Maybe I can show a map that might make it more clear.
Thank you.
Yeah. 1 second here. Okay, so are people seeing this?
Yes.
Okay, so this shows kind of the old plat. And what's happening is...
Excuse me a second, Chris. This is what was attached in Legistar, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So these items in green get vacated temporarily. That's this alleyway, Sanctuary Drive, and Kayak Lane. And then I'm going to switch here to show what the plat that was approved back earlier in the year. And I'm not sure if how this is going to work out for folks, because this was not on the agenda. But this shows Sanctuary Drive being replatted. It just gets reconfigured a little bit. And then that outlot for the alleyway also gets replatted. Again, they just get tweaked a little bit. And then that northern Kayak Drive gets eliminated. And they propose this new housing type with a new alleyway that parallels Autumn Lake Parkway. So again, these now I'm back to the original vacations. These things in green would get vacated, then those new roadways would be re-recorded with the new plat.
If I can do a follow-up then, Chris, that is helpful. I guess just real quickly, the replatting, does that come through us? Does that just go through Plan Commission, or what's the process for that one?
A plat usually goes through the Plan Commission. So the approval of the plat, we put the conditions on there that they had conditions of approval that they would have to, vacate the roadways and recreate the roadways, and that's how that got here. As those resolutions now are coming here as a standard.
Okay. And the replatting was already approved then previously, you're saying?
Yes, in I think it was in like May of last year. Yeah.
Okay. And so that's probably something for us to put on the list of just thinking through process-wise, because it sounds like this is really then, it's really not much of an opportunity to chime in on the change in the transportation component.
Yeah, this is more of I guess kind of procedural step. So that's a good point about the platting, and when in replats, when roadways are changed, that would be the time to
Right.
bring that to this committee, probably, if we wanted to change the geometrics a little bit.
Okay, yeah, I think that's something we should take a look at. I think that would be a better opportunity to talk through it. So knowing that, there's really not much to discuss probably with this one. I guess I would one question, do you know what the length is between, Sanctuary and the alley are, getting shifted just a bit. So the only substantial transportation difference is removal of Kayak. Do you know what the length is between Sanctuary and the next connection up to the north without Kayak then?
I can find that very quickly. So you're kind of getting at how long is the new block length?
Block length, yeah.
Yeah. So we'd be looking at roughly 650 feet.
I think, we just got a presentation actually this last week at MPO. I don't know if you happen to see that or not, but staff had compiled kind of different standards around a bunch of different things, and this was one of them. And they also pulled together recommendations, including from NACTO and others. And I think like 500 was the maximum recommended without having ped bike access. I shouldn't put it out there because I can't remember exactly what the numbers were, but that seems long to me. But I guess again, we've already approved the replat. Maybe this is one where we don't have much of an opportunity, but I think it might be outside of the range of what's recommended in terms of ped bike access connectivity.
Sure. These are just for reference, along in our grid system along the isthmus, those are about 600 feet, in the Livingston and those areas. So just just for reference, it's about as long as I think our planning department likes to get it. But
Okay, thanks for talking through with us.
I think what's happening here is Viridian is finding a lot more demand in some of their more affordable units versus the single family homes where they're able to sell these tighter lot systems a little bit better in this kind of market.
Yep, no, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any further discussion? If not, we'll need a motion.
Move approval.
Okay, Ken move approval. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Grant? Oh, Grant, Bill? Both of you? Okay, we have a motion and a second and a third. Any further discussion? Okay, I don't see any hands. We'll assume a unanimous consent vote unless anyone objects to that. If so, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing no hands, motion is carried unanimously. So we will now move to item number 10. Joe, is Tom Wilson there? I see Tom Wilson. Is he able to be as a panelist, or? There's Tom. Excellent. Tom is the chair of the Traffic Calming Subcommittee. So he's here this evening to talk about item number 10. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks, Anne. So hopefully you'll have a chance to read the attachment and just our summary recommendations document from the Traffic Calming Subcommittee. The group has worked very hard over the past months to come up with kind of a first draft of what we think is a good path forward, and we wanted to bring it to the Transportation Policy and Planning Board and the Transportation Commission to really sort of, I guess, get your blessing, see if we're missing anything, but also maybe to let us know, are we going down the right path? Are we going down the wrong path? And should we back it up a little bit and rethink things? So really looking for your feedback, and then I guess we're also asking for an extension of the deadline for, I think it looks like 2 months until April 15th, 2021. And I know we've asked for an extension before, but this is just sort of a progressive a situation where we keep learning how much more there is for us to learn. And I think we're making really good progress. So with that, I guess I'm not going to read the document to you, but I will quickly cover, I guess, that first real paragraph, the summary recommendations. We're largely recommending that the existing programs be consolidated into one program that would align its priorities with other ongoing initiatives, including but not an exhaustive list, Complete Streets, Vision Zero, and the Metric Transit Network Redesign Study. And our recommendation is that while those initiatives are sort of being fleshed out over the next 2 to 3 years, and this new program is sort of being fleshed out over that time, that the majority of program resources be focused on projects that are one, known safety issues that are close gaps or improve conditions in the core ped bike network in the city. So safety issues, we have that high injury network, really leaning on that to direct our resources. And then, of course, closing major known gaps in our ped bike network, which I believe we also have lists of and maps for as well. And for 2021, we don't want to throw a wrench into the system. So the Traffic Calming Subcommittee is recommending that those 2 priorities be adopted in the project selection for the 2021 construction season. So when the Transportation Commission reviews the list of recommended projects, as it does annually, that when it makes those project selections, once it generally goes along with staff recommendations, but in the past, I know you've shifted some projects up and some projects down on the list, that when you do that this year, that you consider those 2 things in your decision-making process. And then, if you haven't, I encourage you to read the rest of the document. There's a lot of really good information in here. Like I said, a lot of folks have spent quite a bit of time thinking about this independently, bringing our ideas to multiple meetings. We've been meeting pretty much twice a month for the last 6 or 7 months or so. And I'm really proud of the work that we've all done. and I'm excited for what we're going to come up with going forward. So I'm here for questions, and then certainly feedback.
Does anybody have any questions or comments? We have Grant, myself, Bill, Bridget, Harold, we're all on the subcommittee, so folks can certainly weigh in. But I agree with Tom in that I'm very pleased with the progress that we've made, because we were dealing with a lot of information, a lot of different things that we could be thinking about, and I think we've become very well focused on the important issues, and I think that was a huge step forward in our progress. So comments from people. As Tom said, we're looking to make sure we're headed in the right direction. If you agree with that, that's great. If there's anything that we're missing, if you look at the document and you see something, Patrick is staffing our subcommittee, so you can shoot an email to Tom, to myself, to Patrick, and we'll pass that information along to the subcommittee. If not, we'll need a motion to approve. Nasser, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is, what's the reason for the extension until April 15th? What's the reason for the extension?
The reason for the extension request is that we just simply have too much to do. And in order to produce a quality product, we just simply need some more time. As I think I maybe mentioned, that we spend a lot of time just learning how much there was to learn. And the more sometimes you don't know what you're getting into until you start to get into it. And we just feel that in order to produce a really quality report that's not rushed, that's not skipping maybe certain stakeholder groups, that we just need a little bit more time. So hopefully that answers your question well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And if I might add, Tom, I think it's also our plan to not only draft a final report, but also put together a council resolution and deliver a more complete package than perhaps we originally anticipated when we started meeting. So, and it was probably a little bit bigger job than anticipated. That's just my personal thoughts. Anybody else from the subcommittee have any other comments? Or anybody else from the commission have any questions or comments?
We also wanted to be really thoughtful of making sure that every step that we take, we're consulting with staff so that we don't sort of spring something on them that they're not able to do or that'll be very difficult for them. So we're trying to work very closely with them to make sure that anything that we come up with is workable.
Yeah, I agree with that, Tom. And I think what the direction we're headed is very practical and achievable. I think that was very important as well. Other comments? Someone willing to entertain? I'm willing to entertain a motion to approve, which would approve the recommendations to date and the extension to April 15th as well. Anybody willing to make a motion? Grant?
Approval.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Denise. Any further discussion? Okay, I don't see any hands. We'll assume a unanimous consent vote unless anyone objects. If so, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands, the motion passes and is assumed unanimous. Thank you very much for coming tonight, Tom. Okay, next we have Renee. As we talked about last time, I'm just going to give a brief introduction here. I had some questions from members of the commission about these advisory bike lanes that we talked about at our last meeting. So I asked Renee to come back and give a brief presentation, including some comments about education with regard to them. And in addition, I have asked staff, when we have something new that's being used for the first time here in Madison, that staff will give us a brief presentation like this in conjunction with the proposal to implement in the future. So Renee, go ahead.
All right, so thank you. I will just say, since we have a new member tonight, I'm Renee Calloway. I'm in the traffic engineering department, and I am the city's pedestrian and bicycle administrator. And so I will go ahead and share the screen. Here we go. Here we go. All right. So as with Anne mentioned, I'm here to just talk a little bit more about advisory bike lanes. They also are sometimes called edge lane roads or edge shoulders. They sort of have a variety of names here in the United States. And since I know, as mentioned, we have a new member. And so they're called advisory because people can drive into these lanes. And you can see the picture at the bottom. They are dashed, allowing people to move across them. Motor vehicle traffic is in the center, bikes are on the side, but it's not as wide as a traditional road. And so if a car meets someone, if someone driving a car sees another person driving a car coming at them, they yield to people who are in the dashed area on bikes and move over so that everyone can pass. Now that might sound a little confusing, but it's really just the same as many of our residential streets that are narrower. Maybe they have parking on both sides. The street in front of my house is like this. There's, when cars do park on both sides, you have to take turns, people move over. So as you can see on the left, cars are approaching each other. They shift over into that dashed area to make use of that space to move. And if there's no other oncoming motor vehicle, maybe there's bikes in those lanes, the car just goes in the middle like it does on many of our residential streets. If that car on the right side there, if the person driving, there's another one coming, they would slow down, yield, move over into that dashed area. It sounds a little confusing when it has a fancy name, but it's like many of our narrower streets, how they operate today. So these are, new here in Madison, as mentioned. We are looking to put in our first ones this year on Dean Avenue, but these are certainly not new in Europe, where they were used first and are continuing to be used today. Since the 70s, in some countries, the Netherlands is probably the best known for having these. They use them in a lot of situations. And there's some reports that they actually prefer them over regular bike lanes because of the benefits on slowing traffic and the ability to use them in narrow spaces. Now here in North America, both in Canada and here in the United States, they were first used in 2011. Minneapolis, I think, has around 6 or 7 of these installations currently, and they also were the first ones to put them in. Also, Midwestern cities like Grand Rapids have put some in, and we're getting up, I think around what I saw was 35 of the installations here in North America so far. So definitely something in the Midwest, but also across the country. And there's definitely a lot of talk about these and best uses. Now, the Federal Highway Administration, actually, they called them, I believe, edge shoulders. Bill can correct me if I'm wrong later, but I believe they call them edge shoulders. And they're in one of the federal highway guides now as a typical type of installation that you might consider in different situations. Their guide prefers less than 3,000, but says up to 6,000 vehicles per day might be a typical place where you would put these. They prefer 25 miles per hour or less, but streets up to 35 could be considered for this type of installation. They also include these, it's in a guide for rural areas, although currently a lot of our installations are in urban areas, as you'll see. Now, the Dutch and Danish recommendations, obviously the situation there is a little bit different, just with the traffic laws and, generally how many cyclists they would see. But for urban streets, also sort of 2,000 to 5,000 average daily traffic. I will just say that because you shouldn't have to know all of these acronyms. And, obviously 500 bikes per day, they're looking at, obviously numbers of cyclists there are very different. We don't, 4,000 ADT, they have a separate path recommended, but even the most popular path here along Lake Monona, 4,000 is a pretty good day for us. So obviously you have to take that into consideration, thinking about sort of how they do things there. But those are their recommendations on when to use these. Now there's kind of a variety here within our advisory bike lanes of what you might see. From very, very low volume streets, such as the one in Bloomington, Indiana, which is down around 500 cars per day, up to Minneapolis and Burlington, which are experimenting with higher volume streets in that 4,500 and 5,000. And I'll just, reflecting back on where we are looking at putting our first advisory bike lane, Dean Avenue, its highest part of that street is around 2,000 vehicles per day. So sort of midpoint of what we see here in the US. And then width of the advisory bike lanes here in the US is also varies a little bit. And so there is some variety as well. And once again, ours is sort of in the midpoint with although on the lower end, we are looking at a 10 and 10 for motor vehicles, and then 14 total for the advisory bike lane space. So 7, 10, 7. Now, Alta, which is a consulting firm that does transportation planning type of work, also put together a great piece that some of you may have looked at, just in 2017, kind of looking at the state of advisory bike lanes here in the US. And they concluded that they are working. There have been 2, I think, that I know of that have come out. But generally, people put them in. They worked well. The cities kept them in most situations and felt like it was a tool that they would continue to use on streets. You may have noticed that a lot of times they were trying to improve, say, a bicycle connection in a narrow space, but sometimes they were looking at this as an option for a traffic calming benefit as well. They had a street where speeds were high and they wanted to do something to bring those speeds down. And that is something that we saw on Dean Avenue. It's obviously a city bicycle route, so we wanted to make an improvement for that purpose. But we also did know that there were some concerns about speeding on that street. So this kind of has a double benefit. Also, they noted that education can be important because this is something that's new. People don't necessarily know what it means, although there were some cities. I think, for instance, Bloomington, they just installed it over the summer. It was on a street where a lot of university students and staff lived. Didn't really do a lot of education, but people kind of understood it naturally, how to use it. So it was good to see that there were some instances like that as well, where, they didn't have to do very much. People kind of could figure it out on their own. But they did report that they felt like it was beneficial. And there were some instances where people were sort of unsure what the different paint meant and if they should drive both directions. One thing they did note is that on-street parking that isn't well used did create some ambiguity in some situations. So particularly where it made people, they weren't really sure what it was. Like, was that a lane they should be driving in? Because looked pretty wide with no cars parked. On Dean Avenue, we do have some on-street parking that isn't the highest utilized parking, but we did try to create it in a way so it's pretty obvious with sort of parking pull-outs, I guess, to make it clear that that's not a driving lane, that's very clearly just for parking. They also said that narrower travel lanes are better, and then wider bike lanes just for slowing traffic and to ensure that people understood that you were not trying to just squeeze through in the middle and maybe encroach into the bike space. And then in Europe, they frequently do use colored pavement in these types of facilities, but not too many people have done that here. And it didn't necessarily, what they were looking at for projects here in the US, it didn't necessarily seem like it was necessary to incur that added long-term cost of having colored pavement. Now, education, I did include a link for the video in Ottawa because I feel like if you clicked on that and watched it, it does a pretty good job of explaining it. And I think that's something that we did send out to the residents here on Dean Avenue to help them understand this concept more, since obviously it does seem a little confusing at the beginning. So if you haven't watched that and listened to it, it's pretty good. On-street signage, as you can see, that's a typical sign there on the right that is used for these installations. One thing that we did do with the parking protected bike lane when that went in on Bassett Street and is something that people have done with these types of advisory bike lanes is just doing a mailing to people in that neighborhood to be more specific with them about how it worked. And then also doing social media press releases. I know that when we've done new things, we do get pretty good coverage from the media on that just to get the word out in a larger area beyond just the neighborhood. And then just having things that are easily shareable by alders, neighborhood associations, things like that, just to help spread the word however we can. So that is kind of what we would be looking at doing here, as well as just having new information on our website about how this works so that anyone who happened to be searching for it would be able to find some information on these different kinds of facilities. That was kind of just quick, so I will stop sharing and take questions.
Questions or comments for Renee? Chris, go ahead. Oh, Harold, you're first. I'm sorry, Chris. Harold's first and then Chris.
Thanks. Renee, can you remind us on Dean Avenue of the widths for the various pieces of the road? Because one of the things when reading the report, which was great, and thank you for sharing that, was that I think the guidance says that you should have 6 feet without gutter for the advisory bike lane, but except for one project, all of the projects that they discussed in there actually were narrower than that. So I'm wondering where we landed on, if we even made that decision yet.
Sure. So we are going with a 24-foot street. And 10 of that would be that center lane for motor vehicles. And then 7 and 7, which I think would include the gutter. So we would sort of be at that level that you mentioned.
Okay, yeah, that's good. And I mean, I think going forward, I mean, keeping that in mind, because I mean, the only concern that the report actually doesn't really address, or that there's no information on, is how the existence of these advisory lanes influence how people driving and biking position themselves in the lane, which especially is a concern when it comes to parking. Like, you know, if you have a narrowish advisory bike lane and you have a car coming from behind, does that mean people bike closer to the cars? Does that mean people driving will just move over right next to the lane? So I think being mindful of the spacing considerations there is something that we have to take into account whenever we look at using those. And I think in general, I mean, yeah, there's one study that shows an impact on speeds. I think for the rest of it, it's like, you know, they work in that people don't complain about them and that they don't cause any safety issues or crashes, but maybe also they don't do a whole lot beyond that, or at least we don't know about that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the speed studies, I think Minneapolis saw some, you know, decreases, but obviously there's not that, I mean, there's only 35. The different evaluations that have been done vary a little bit, so.
Okay, we have Chris, then it'll be Denise, and then Bill. So Chris, go ahead. Oh, and then Ken, okay. So Chris, you're up. We can't hear you, Chris.
Got it. Yes, I had some similar thoughts to Harold, and thanks, Renee, for sharing the video and stuff around. I think that was helpful for visualizing some of this stuff a little bit. I can just talk through my thoughts, which were similar. So initially, my initial thought in kind of thinking through how this worked was that it kind of just reinforces how a road, like an unmarked road like this, would probably work anyway. So I kind of was wondering what the benefits were. And so I did dig around a little bit. There was a study in Canada that looked at some of the effects there, and it did mention that it seemed to affect speeds and also lateral distance, I think, between drivers and bikes, and some other benefits. I could point folks to that study, maybe if that's not on the list already. So yeah, I guess that's it. I think part of me, my gut on this was that it kind of felt like over-engineering in a way, especially for a low volume road where it might just reinforce, like I said, what people are doing. But I think there seems to be enough evidence out there that it does have some of those benefits. So I can share that around. So thanks.
Yeah, if you would send that to Patrick, Chris, that would be great, and we can send it around. Okay, Denise, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. Renee, thanks for the presentation and for the materials earlier in the week. They were super helpful. I know, as I understand it, this project has gone around the neighborhood and it was delayed to get more neighborhood feedback, if I'm understanding that all correctly. Kind of how's the neighborhood responding to this idea of the advisory bike lanes?
Sure. And obviously when we first presented to them, it's very new and different. So there were definitely some concerns about that concept. But then, we did have a second meeting, people were able to see the video and think and learn a little bit more about it. And when we did survey on 3 different options that we had provided for that street, this did end up getting the largest amount of support actually from the neighborhood. This was their preference of the options presented.
Thank you.
Okay, Bill, you're next.
Thanks, Ann. Renee, you give me too much credit. I had not seen this until you sent this material for this meeting, frankly. I had never known about it. It looked very good to me, and very, very excited we're going to try it. As far as what it's called, I don't care. But the only thing that I guess, as far as the educational component, that sign that you showed, that didn't do anything for me. Okay, it didn't help me. If I was, and I am relatively new to see this, that sign didn't do it. The video was absolutely tremendous, and I agree that I think that I know, as far as over engineering it, I don't know that the sign is valuable or not. I think it caused more questions than it's worth, frankly. But so I'm not sure just where you stand with using the signs.
I think that's awesome for feedback. It definitely is. Not every city has used the sign. Some have elected not to. So I think it's really good to hear from people if they feel like it's more confusing or better with the sign as we think through what we would want to do.
I'll put on my old hat. That sign isn't approved in the manual either, is it? Has anybody requested experimentation with it?
So
it's a federal highway?
That is a good question. I don't know.
I bet they haven't. So I don't know. I just don't think the sign is, I would try it without the sign. That's my opinion.
Well, you worked at Federal Highway, so it's a good opinion to have.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Ken, you're next.
My question is, when I looked at all the other materials, it seems like this was done in a situation where there was an existing road with curbs, and they had a lot of restraints as far as they couldn't push things out. why are we doing this on a road that we're all ready to do as opposed to a place in the city where we already have curbs and, you know what I mean? It seems sort of counterintuitive that if you have the option of having a road where you're going to put in curbs and haven't decided how wide to make the road, that you would use this as opposed to a wider road where you could have two-way traffic and also bike lanes.
Sure, I think that's a great question because obviously sometimes this is used, in a constrained environment where there's no larger reconstruction project going on. But I think we put it on the table for consideration here because we did want to address speeding concerns. We also wanted to address concerns of stormwater management and the desire to have adequate space for rain gardens, as well as this being a priority location for sidewalks. So, within the available right-of-way and trying to juggle all of those things, this seemed like a really good way to sort of address keeping the street narrow for traffic calming and providing a slightly better experience for people biking, since this is a primary bike route into this neighborhood. I don't know, I think Jim might have joined us if he has any other thoughts on that, but that's kind of why we were considering this, even though it's a full reconstruction.
Jim, did you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, just to hop in here too, that on Dean Avenue too, we're really trying to keep the street as narrow as possible. It's got a pretty unique drainage characteristic out there. So we wanted to, if possible, maintain wider terraces to do a lot of rain gardens to help contain and treat some of the stormwater with the project. So this kind of presented an opportunity to keep the street width a little bit more narrow while still helping improve the bikeability on the street a little bit too.
So then just a fallback question, if for whatever reason we decide this isn't working, what does it go to then? A stripe down the middle and Sharrow kind of situation or what?
I mean, sure, if we evaluate this and we feel that it's not successful, then that obviously we would still have that typical width of 24 feet to go back to sort of more of that bike boulevard style of a street and have Sharrows. So,
okay.
Anything else, Ken?
No.
Okay. Nazra, you next.
Hi, Renee. Thank you so much for this great presentation. I have two questions. One question is the advisory bike. How was it decided to have this advisory bike in Dean Avenue? That's my first question. Second is, are there any other streets that are being considered in the in Madison area? And third question is, in terms of the education, the neighborhood, how did you select and what form or format have you engaged in the neighborhood?
Sure. So we did have a couple other options that we ended up presenting to the neighborhood. And hopefully I get these correct, but Jim is here to help me. So one was a 26-foot wide street that would have parking on one side and would have sidewalk on both sides, but one side of the sidewalk would be wider at 8 feet so that a less confident bicyclist would be able to use that sidewalk, but there would be space to share it easier with pedestrians. And then we also presented a street that would have just more part of it, the section that has higher traffic volumes would be made wider at 32 foot with marked bike lanes. And then it would narrow up as you traveled east and volumes were less to be more of just Sharrows with a shared street space. But obviously where it's wider, that would compromise the ability to do some things with stormwater management and rain gardens. So we had 2 neighborhood meetings. This actually happens to be Alder Foster's district, Dean Avenue. And so we had 2 meetings, and we, at the first meeting, took a lot of feedback. The third option actually came out of that meeting, just some ideas from residents. We had some surveys beforehand to try to understand the concerns both around stormwater management and traffic safety, to try to think about priorities in the right of way. And then we did do a survey of residents of the options that we came up with people able to rank their first, second, and third choices. And this particular option was by far the first choice for the majority of people. And then I think for the rest, it definitely fell into sort of that second category. And I guess, I don't know, Jim, if I think I summed that up.
Yep.
Any other thoughts,
Yeah.
Jim?
No, I think Renee covered the options there pretty well. And this project was originally proposed maybe back in 2016, I think, and had been delayed a little bit, mostly as it relates to some proposed sidewalk work and some of those things too. So this was a project that has been kind of on the radar for a while as well too, that a lot of the residents have been expecting this for a couple of years as well.
Okay, thank you. Grant, you're next.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Renee. Thanks everybody for the good questions. So yeah, I'm Alder of this district, so it's participated in all the public meetings on it. And I also was supportive of this option and was happy that the neighbors were as well. I would say that I feel really enthusiastic about this design actually, and think that it could be something that we should consider for a lot of our reconstruction projects. So, you know, in this case, this is again 2,000 ADT on this road. I would not call that a low volume street. I would say, you know, medium or low medium, if you want to put it that way, but it's very different than a local street that's got 200 to 400. And especially at that, you know, the real issue with volume as it relates to bike facilities is especially how many vehicles in peak hour, because that's where, you know, basically the issue, if you don't have a separated space for people biking and you have two-way motor vehicle traffic, the chances of the person on the bike really getting squeezed out and feeling very uncomfortable because they don't have a place to be increases. So that's why the issue when you start having higher volume roadways, why it's important to have a separated space for the person biking. So, you know, one of the policies that was adopted by the Common Council really requires us to provide high quality access for people walking and biking for people of all ages and abilities. So using the NACTO All Ages and Abilities Bike Reference Guide, they don't recommend, they recommend having bike lanes basically once you get above 1,500 ADT. They do allow for a bike boulevard up to 2,000 ADT if you bring the speed limit down to 20. So we, you know, as a starting point for Dean, if we were going to meet that policy goal, we were either looking at a side path or we were looking at bike lanes. If you look at bike lanes and don't look at this edge lane road concept, you're talking about a 34-foot wide cross section. So the difference between that and this concept is 10 feet of pavement, which is actually really, really significant. A 34-foot wide street versus a 24-foot wide is night and day. And, you know, I haven't looked at the research around the study for travel speeds, but I imagine, you know, the question of if you painted, you know, if you had a 24-foot wide street and you painted some advisory bike lanes, how much does that change things is one question. But the question between what's the difference between a 24-foot edge lane road and a 34-foot conventional bike lane road, you know, those are just two really, really different environments. So I think the other thing that's really important is, you know, yeah, Dean had, you know, particular goals related to stormwater management and infiltration, but this is going to be a primary discussion topic in our Complete and Green Streets work. And I would say there's a lot of interest in understanding how we use the public right-of-way for stormwater infiltration. And so this idea like, well, we're reconstructing anyways, we've got this right-of-way, why don't we just, use the whole thing up and build that 34-foot wide, has a really direct impact on how we're able to manage our stormwater. And I think moving forward, I certainly support pushing ourselves to not use more space than we need, to not put down more pavement than we need. And I think this is I'm excited to see how it works in real life here, but I think it's a really, really great design that both provides a dedicated space for people biking, which is important because having a 24-foot wide street without any markings and 2,000 cars per day, that's not an all ages and abilities facility, and that's not going to provide comfort for a lot of people biking. So really, with some simple paint, we can now have an environment where we've got that dedicated space. And really, the only drawback is that if there are two cars going in opposite directions and there's somebody biking at the same time, some driver's going to have to wait a second or two to, in order to pass and to continue on. So the real, basically what we're doing is saving 10 feet width of pavement in order to technically reduce the motor vehicle capacity, in the slightest degree. So I went on a little bit there, but I just want to say I think this is something that we should really be looking at pretty seriously for a lot of other projects, especially for projects in this mid-range where it's not a very high volume street and it's also not a very low volume street. I think this is a really great solution.
Okay, thanks, Grant. Bill, you're next.
Thanks, Ann. Question to Renee, I guess, as far as evaluation, I guess one of the things that excites me about this concept is the potential for traffic calming. And I would hope that we try to maybe in the evaluation see what the speeds are and try to compare it with other streets in comparison as far as speeds. And maybe some, hopefully use this in the toolbox for traffic calming. So that's what I guess my suggestion as far as the evaluation. Thanks.
Yes. And we have asked that Renee come back to us and let us know how it works. So that's great feedback. Harold?
Yeah, along those same lines, I think Alta Foster made a great sales pitch. So, I mean, if this does indeed work as intended, then yeah, that seems like a great solution. And maybe that is like in addition to, the speed is relatively easily measurable. The comfort of people using the street for biking, that's a little bit harder to get. And I think the report, usually like what they mentioned there, like nobody complained about it, which is like good, but maybe not exactly what we're looking for. So maybe we can do some thinking in the future of maybe some more deliberate outreach in the bike community and being like, hey, what do you think? Have you biked here? How does it feel to bike there? Something like that, which is, very qualitative feedback, but I think that might be important to gather, especially if we think this could be a model for more places in the city. Thanks.
Sure, and it's about feeling safe too. So very important. Grant, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, the other components with this project. We really took the cues from what's coming out of the traffic calming subcommittee group as well, where this will include speed humps and so we've got the road narrowing, and then it's very limited sort of parking, and the parking that is there is what I would call bump in parking. So kind of all of those features combined, I think is going to create a completely different environment than the wide open environment that's there today. So I think, we certainly will go back and measure speeds following the project. I'm very confident that there's going to be a noticeable change there, but just, to be clear that it's not simply making one change, putting an advisory bike lane, but rather taking this more comprehensive approach and saying, hey, how do we really change the nature of this to make it feel like this is not a freeway? So I think that was a real positive with this project as well. And I think engineering is on board with that approach as well, to really think about adding whatever the right kinds of traffic calming elements are as we're doing these full reconstruct projects going forward.
Great. It sounds like an excellent new tool for us to use. Bill, I'm with you. I didn't find that sign. I found that sign confusing. Personally, I'm just curious other people's thoughts about it, because this is the first time we're doing this here. So, if people think the sign does more harm than good, Harold, your thoughts?
No sign. Let's try without.
Okay. Nazra?
Is Dean Avenue the first for this project in Madison?
Yes.
Yes.
And are there any other streets that are being considered in Madison?
Sure. So at this point, this is the first one that we're proposing. I mean, it's definitely something that we've been thinking about. But I think at this point, 2021, this is the one that we'll do and evaluate and then see from there where we think it might work or if it doesn't work in this particular location, and learn from that as we move forward and propose this in the future.
And then the other question I had earlier, how did you decide this project to be considered for Dean Avenue? What was the criteria?
Jim, I don't know. I mean, I think, we were just looking at the available public right of way. And this has been done in Minneapolis, Alder Foster's district, and he knew about this treatment, which definitely helps to have an alder who's familiar with this, having been done somewhere else. I think, we've just been looking at doing some of these newer treatments that people are starting to do around the US that seem to be showing positive results. I don't know if Jim has anything he wants to add to that.
Yeah. When we were looking at potential options for Dean Avenue, we probably started with 12 or 15 different cross-section options as possible ones that fit into the street. And then we met with Alder Foster a couple of times as we kind of took a look at all the various goals and things that we wanted to achieve with the project. And we really kind of narrowed in on really what Renee had mentioned for the three options that we had proposed to the neighborhood in terms of options that provided for all modes of transportation, safe options for all modes, also opportunities for the stormwater treatment, and also larger canopy tree plantings too, in addition to speed reduction and all the other aspects that we were shooting for. So this kind of fit with some of the characteristics on the street for all the things that we wanted to do, that we had right-of-way space where we felt we could achieve all these goals with the right street cross-section. So we kind of felt this fit best into that area.
Thank you.
Denise, go ahead.
I want to pick up on a suggestion that I think maybe Harold recommended a couple minutes ago. I'd love to see this project, since it's the first, to be one that we really look at what the evaluation criteria are. So Jim, I heard you talk about, speed, looking at speed and speed reduction. I'd love to see a post neighborhood survey. What are they experiencing? A biker survey, so pedestrian survey, some kind of tools that look at the user experience, so that we have that data as well, to help inform, future. And also to help with other neighborhoods that we're looking at these kinds of treatments, to say, here's what the folks in this neighborhood experience, so that I think that also might help with, having folks adopt the new idea.
Great, thank you. Other comments? Okay, well, that's great discussion with regard to advisory bike lanes. And we have a future agenda item to ask Renee to come back and talk about to evaluate the safety and efficacy of the advisory bike lanes. We'll add user experience there and some of the other things that people have talked about as best we can, like looking at the speeds to see if it helps with traffic calming. excuse me. Any other comments with regard to advisory bike lanes? Very helpful, Renee. Thanks, and great discussion, everybody. Next, item number 12. Metro Transit's not quite ready for this item, the approval of bus pads to be constructed in 2021. So I would ask for a motion to refer this to the Transportation Commission meeting on January 27th, 2021. I could have a motion to refer this forward, please. Ken, motion by Ken. Denise, is that a second? Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll assume a unanimous consent vote to refer this item forward to the meeting on January 27th. Unless there's an objection to an unanimous consent vote. If so, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands, the motion carries. Update on traffic calming subcommittee. We discussed the interim recommendations very thoroughly earlier and the request for the extension. We have had, that was drafted as of December 17th. We did have another meeting on January 7th. We reviewed and discussed evaluation ranking criteria. This conversation will be continued at the next meeting. We're also going to talk about what kind of name we'd like to see for the new program, look at the existing programs and budget accounts, which would be recommended to be included, format of the final report, council resolution, etc. So that's just a brief update since the report that you saw earlier. Anybody else from the subcommittee have any other comments? Okay, we'll keep you posted. Chris or Grant, want to give us a crossover report from the Transportation Policy and Planning Board? Who wants to go?
I can.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
All right. So probably the big news is we TPV recommended approval of the revised locally preferred alternatives for the BRT route. One component that was in the report, which would have repurposed a parking lane on Whitney Way that had very low utilization for a protected bike lane. Alder Martin requested holding off on that to be able to have one additional public meeting to review that with her constituents. So I think she's working with Renee on that meeting, and so the TPPB recommended that that we hold off on including that in the LPA report, and that the decision on that we referred it to Transportation Commission. Mm-hmm. So following that public meeting, we'll see it here, and we'll be asked to make a recommendation on that. And then the other thing, I'm actually not sure if it got sent to TC members or not, but Tom Lynch gave an annual report for the Transportation Department, which had a lot of good information in it. So if that wasn't sent out to TC members already, I would say that would be worth sending out. It's in Legistar, but maybe Patrick can find that and just share it with Transportation Commission members so you can kind of see the year in review. And then we were gonna also then take a look at the 2021 DOT work plan, but that wasn't quite ready, so that'll be at our next meeting.
Yeah, Grant, I thought that report that Tom Lynch presented was very helpful. So Patrick, I would like to see that sent out to people, but it would also be nice to have a link to that portion of the meeting, because it was also helpful to hear what Tom had to say with regard to the report, because obviously a lot happened last year. And he does talk about what is being planned for 2021 to some degree as well. So very, very helpful. And I did add that item that you mentioned with regard to Whitney Way onto our future agenda items so that we have that tracked going forward. Chris, did you have anything else to add?
No, thanks, Grant. I didn't have my notes quite as ready this time.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you so much. Next, we still have 2 vacancies on the Transportation Commission. I've been working with the mayor's office and we've made a lot of progress having 2 new members recently, which is great. And I know they're diligently working on it, and we continue to discuss the need for diversity on the commission, and I know that's being considered as well. We are also looking at planning another joint Transportation Commission, Transportation Policy and Planning Board meeting. At our last meeting on September 30th, our last joint meeting, we decided we should try to set another joint meeting for as early as February 2021. So we're working on getting a group together in order to find a date and also look at the action items. We did discuss this at the September 30th meeting, and certainly when we look at the minutes from the meeting in terms of what those action items are, mainly we're looking at following up on equity, diversity, and inclusion challenges, proposed amendments to the Transportation Commission ordinance, the Metro Transit Network redesign study reports, traffic calming subcommittee final report or interim reports, proactive engagement on budget planning discussions, prioritization of capital street projects, complete green streets, and Chris Pedikowski asked that we also consider adding transportation improvement program or TIP reviews. So that's what we've got as our starting point, for the joint committee agenda. If you have any other suggestions, you can certainly give them to me now or send an email to me or to Patrick, and we'll add it to the list of things to be discussed. Anything from anybody? Okay. In terms of future agenda items, included in Legistar was the potential agenda items for the January 27th meeting. There were a couple of things that were supposed to be, well, actually 2 or 3 that we thought would be handled this evening, but got delayed. The Davies Dempsey Maher Street, the 2021 Public Works projects, as well as the bus pads. So those are on the agenda for January 27th, as well as the other items listed there. And we've got a pretty good long list of other items for future meetings that I've included as well, just so everybody knows that, we've noted them and we're tracking them going forward. Does anybody have any other items for the next meeting or for future meetings that you would like to suggest at this point? Again, if you don't have it handy, you can certainly send it to Patrick or to me. Okay. Next, we do have a late item to be considered. Renee, we have a request for a crossing guard.
Yes, so I am going to share my screen again. Here we go. Okay. So we have received a request from the Pope Farm Elementary principal for a crossing guard. So this is a brand new school in Middleton Cross Plains School District. We'll actually be opening for in-person classes for the first time on February 1st. It was slated to open, obviously, this school year, but has been all virtual. This is a K through 4 grade school. It is kind of an interesting situation. It is technically in the city of Madison, the school, as well as probably, it feels like the majority of the attendance area actually is city of Madison neighborhoods. In this particular location. And so this would be the first time actually that we have a crossing guard placement in a different school district, although we do have a few for private schools here in Madison. Otherwise, they're just private schools or Madison Metropolitan School District schools. So this crossing guard, I just thought it would be helpful for you to know. It would really just be working 2 hours a day through June 8th. So that would be about 166 hours of work for this crossing guard should the Middleton Cross Plains School District and this particular school remain in-person classes and not have to go back, at least for some part of that, for virtual. So a maximum of 166 hours. This kind of shows you, for those of you who are not familiar with the far west side of Madison, where this is. If you know where Pleasant View Road is, this is primarily west of that. It is, so the part that's in Madison is south of Blackhawk Road, as well as south of Old Sauk Road, to kind of give you a feel for where this is located at. Like I said, the majority of that space, that part of the attendance area between Blackhawk and Old Sauk Road is a neighborhood that is City of Madison, as well as much of that development that is south of Old Sauk Road. Those homes are within the City of Madison, although there are some parts of this area that are within Middleton, particularly within the town of Middleton. So in talking to the elementary school principal, there are 142 students who live in what they call the walk zone, and their walk zone is 1.1 miles from the school. And that area is located between Old Sauk Road and Blackhawk Road. So that development area there. There are another 39 students in that particular area that will receive bus service because they are farther than 1.1 miles away. And then south of Old Sauk Road, there are another 172 students. They do live pretty close to the school, some of them, but Old Sauk Road has been designated as a hazardous, where they have a hazardous designation, which means that then they provide bus service for those students, regardless of the distance. And there are some students who do live north of Blackhawk Road, that is the town of Middleton, but not. That development is much more sparse, and there are not a lot of families with K-4 students in that area currently. So in thinking about this, I should mention that, it does provide some challenges going forward, having a crossing guard that is within a different school district, because that does mean that their sort of school schedule is not the same, starts and spring breaks, winter breaks, sort of professional development days, they're different. So that will provide some challenges should they qualify for a guard. But we are recommending at this time, since school is starting on February 1st, that we do place a temporary crossing guard on Shoe Road. A lot of people pronounce that one differently. Shui Road, I don't know. For the rest of the year, we put that at Shadow Ridge Trail, where we feel like there are quite a few students who would cross there, and would be potentially a lot of cars traveling off of Old Sauk Road. That's where the majority of the traffic would probably come from. However, we would then, once school is in session, we would do our typical crossing guard studies. And we would look at 3 different locations that the school had an interest in having a crossing guard at. And that we would then be able to come back with a recommendation for the 21-22 school year based on the information that we're able to gather once school starts. I did just include the crossing guard placement criteria because it has been a while since we've talked about it. With the virtual school for the past year, we did not come back to recommend any additional placements at the Madison School District. So if you're interested in that, that is available to look at. And this is just a map of that area, particularly the red stars where we would put this temporary crossing guard if it was approved. The 2 yellow stars would be what we would study as well. to come back for a 21-22 recommendation based specifically on that criteria. And then since this school isn't open, and so most of you have probably never seen this school, it is part of a bigger development out there. If you've ever heard of Pope Farm Park with sunflowers, that's where it's at. That's what it's famous for out there. It is, unfortunately, the kids who are coming, it is kind of a walk down here to the entrance, but this is the Shadow Ridge Trail crossing where we would, where we're recommending we would put that temporary guard just for the rest of the school year if you feel that that's warranted. And I can take questions, and I'll just go back to the map that helps you understand where we're talking about.
Bridget, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a question, Renee. So am I right in understanding then that this school is at least partially, or where this crossing guard would be stationed, is outside of the city limits?
It is within the city limits. Yes,
it is.
That road is all within the city limits, as well as the vast majority of this neighborhood that you can see here.
Okay. And how does that work with crossing guards? So, assuming that they're trained and sort of deputized through the municipal police force within which they serve, do they then are they sort of under contract, and are you able to move them around on an as needed basis?
Yeah, so the crossing guards as of January 1st moved to traffic engineering from the police department. So they actually are supervised by me now.
Okay.
And we have technically by 2 crossing guard supervisors that I supervise. So we have, I believe, 4 crossing guards that will be working at private schools that have been working at private schools that have reopened. The vast majority of our crossing guards are laid off and are receiving unemployment. So we would call up one of those guards to this spot. And if MMSD returns to school, we would give them the opportunity to return to their normal location. And we would fill the vacant positions that we would attempt to fill the vacant positions that we have. And if they were called up and we had vacancies and we were not able to hire quickly enough to fill, we would then just evaluate the spots based on what we know about them. And some spots would have to be left vacant until we could fill those vacancies, because I think we have 5 or 6 guards now that have decided to permanently retire from being crossing guards.
Okay. So you had mentioned, so the responsibility is moved into your shop now. I'm assuming though that, just in accordance with the statutes, they're still trained as traffic officers by law enforcement, right?
So obviously, since they moved on January 1st, we haven't had any training, but we would partner with them. And there are other duties that we partner with MPD on, such as crossing guards do have the ability to record information about that have disregarded the stops and have tickets issued. Partnership with the police department to continue that forward.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, and Bridget, we do have an item for an upcoming agenda to have a full update on the crossing guard program that's been moved from MPD to traffic engineering. So all great questions, and we weren't expecting to have this, were we, Renee? This request?
No, we weren't. I mean, I knew that this school was in the city of Madison, but obviously the opening of schools has been sort of this ongoing, it's kind of unclear if it's really going to happen. So, but now that they have made a decision to return, we felt like we should try to provide that guard while we could do a study, which I should mention, I forgot to mention this. The last new school that was built, I believe, was Olson Elementary, where we did also place a temporary guard until a full study could be conducted to determine if they met their criteria for a permanent guard placement.
So you have some precedent for this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Grant, you're next.
Thank you, Renee. On that last bit, what is the guard still assigned to Olson then, or did you pull it out after the study?
I do believe that they ended up qualifying for that. I think I asked the crossing guard supervisors, and it's close to 90% of elementary schools do qualify for at least one guard. It's pretty rare that they don't have one. So there are some places that have pretty high walking rates or they're just, it's placed in such a way that it's easier to separate that walking traffic from the motor vehicle traffic, but it is pretty common to qualify for one.
And so for all of the elementaries that qualify one, are they all staffed with one as well then?
They are, but as I said, we've had quite a few people who have decided to permanently retire from their position. So if MMSD opens up with very little notice, it could be hard to fill all of those at this time. And we also feel there could be guards right now because of the pandemic who are reluctant to return if school returns, even though we've been asking them to think about that and be prepared to return. But it's obviously, we would want to ideally fill all those positions and get every crossing covered.
So, I appreciate hearing that we took this approach with another school. That gives me a little bit more comfort. I don't know how many commissioners gone through this process with schools, especially the process of removing a crossing guard that has been somewhere. I can tell you my previous experience on Ped Bike Motor Vehicle Commission, and I don't know, Renee, you might have data on this. Have we ever been successfully removed a crossing guard where there was one, even when they no longer qualify? Because in my experience, very, very difficult, and parents show up and it's very difficult to take something away once we've given it. So do you have any data on that?
I don't have any data on that. I would say there probably is some case where we did do it, but it is very challenging. As long as some kids are using that crossing, parents are going to come and they really want to keep that crossing guard. So it is a challenge once we put one in to take it back out.
Well, and I can say I was on the side of arguing to keep them in school that technically did not qualify anymore. I think it's really important that we do support the opportunity to have safe walking environment for kids to walk to school. I'm just honestly, it'd be great to get that overview of the whole program. I'm really excited being over to TE and would love to just kind of refresh our thinking on how we're using those resources, et cetera. So I'm just a little bit nervous about sort of doing that, of starting one there and then potentially having to pull it out at some point. But given that we've got the resources available and you seem like you have a solid plan to do the test, et cetera, I think it makes sense. My only other thought is just in terms of placement, which it sounds like you're going to be studying and reviewing. And I don't know where the actual entrance is for the school, but it does look like if all the kids south of Old Sauk are getting bused or are able to be bused, I'm just wondering if that River Birch isn't a more central location to serve more kids than down at the Shadow Ridge Trail. But I'm sure you've thought through all that already.
Sure. And can you see my pointer here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that south end of the school is where the entrance is. And I think we were thinking of starting this one just because there would be more traffic coming off Old Sauk Road. And I think this map doesn't show all of the development that has filled in this area. And this is a park, but this is filled in. So, and coming off Blackhawk there, which is off the screen, there is just probably a lot less people coming that way. So I think we would work with the school, and if we feel like there are more kids there, we could move that one crossing guard during this part of the school year too.
Great, thank you.
Nazra, go ahead.
Thanks, Renee. So my question is for the temporary guard placement, since the school is out of Madison School District, who absorbs the budget?
So at this point, we're just saving money by our crossing guards not working because we have a full budget based on them actually being in work. And so now they're in layoff status and eligible depending on their particular situation. If they have, a lot of them, not a lot, but some have other jobs that impact their ability to get unemployment insurance. But this is something that's funded by the city of Madison.
And is the city of Madison, Middleton, and Cross Plain consuming some of the budget, or just the city of Madison is taking the whole budget?
Sure. For this particular situation, it would be the city of Madison because the school, the road, and the pretty much all of the neighborhood that would be walking to this school is city of Madison. We do have a couple other situations. We have a agreement with Fitchburg where they do pay some costs for crossing guard on Post Road, where the road is half Madison, half Fitchburg. And so there's a cost share, as well as the town of Madison currently, until it is dissolved, is paying for some costs over for Lincoln Elementary as well. But in this particular case, it is a City of Madison Street, City of Madison residents who would be using it. So we would be paying for this particular cost.
Thank you.
Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate Alder Foster's insight on the challenges of removing a crossing guard. And so it got me thinking, I guess we know that this is a temporary situation pending a study, but it won't look that way to folks in the public. So is there any reason that, you know, if this decides not to remain in place, that would be any easier than the typical process of removing a crossing guard?
Sure, it would probably only be easier to do if we were placing it somewhere else. You know, like we did a study, one area didn't qualify, but another did. But obviously, that's still going to be easier just to put a second than remove one. It's never easy.
Okay, thanks.
Renee, didn't you say that, did you quote 95% of all schools qualify for at least one?
So I think what the crossing guard supervisors told me was it's about 90% do end up qualifying for one. But I think the challenge is when demographics change, then you might recommend the removal. Like I will probably come to this committee at some point to recommend the removal of a crossing guard. And that's very hard to do, even when the demographics of a neighborhood change and there's not enough children walking to qualify, or there's some other change.
Okay. I'm thinking that we should probably move up your presentation on the crossing guard program, Renee, because there may be some questions and we may need to have more than one conversation about it. So originally, I think I talked with Yang and he was saying sometime in the spring. So maybe you can think about when you want to bring that to the TC so we can follow up on some of these questions as well.
Sure. Yeah.
Other questions? I would entertain a motion. We would need a motion to approve the temporary placement of a crossing guard as recommended by Renee. Bill?
I'll make a motion for a provisional crossing guard for the school, with the understanding that the study will be completed before the crossing guard provisional it becomes permanent.
Okay, there's a motion that for approval for a provisional crossing guard with the understanding that a study will be done before the guard becomes permanent. Ken, is that a second? Okay, discussion. Bill?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't lower my hand.
Hand still up. Okay, all right. Any discussion? Not seen any hands. We had a lot of good discussion already. So we'll assume a unanimous consent vote approving the provisional crossing guard for this for Pope Farm Elementary. Love their logo, by the way, Renee. With the understanding that a study will be done before the guard becomes permanent. So we'll assume a unanimous consent vote unless anyone wishes to vote no or a roll call vote. So please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none. Motion's approved and assumed unanimous. Thanks, Renee. We need a motion to adjourn.
make a motion for adjournment.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Harold? Okay, we got a second, a third, and a fourth. There we go. So we'll assume a unanimous consent vote on adjournment unless we hear from anybody else. And this was a little bit of a shorter meeting than we normally have, but just plan your schedules that it might be a little bit longer next time because I'm anticipating quite a bit of discussion on a couple of those that are coming next time. So thanks, everybody.
Go Packers.
Go Packers, you bet. I'm wearing my Packer gear.